Hello and welcome back to What is this weapon? I'm Jonathan and this is the Rexim Favor, or should I say the Rexim FV Mark IV, which is its formal name when it actually came out. Now, I first heard of this thing via a pop culture route, which we'll come back to, but there are a couple of fairly major science fiction films that this thing shows up in. But let's do justice to its history as firearm in the first place, and also a bit about the company, because there's a fair bit of intrigue floating around. More so the company than the gun, and the gun is an object at the end of the day. But this was its only significant firearms product, so there's a good connection there. So Rexim SA was founded in 1947 in Geneva by Roger Simonin. But the actual guns were made at La Coruña, the Spanish arsenal and commercial concern, effectively, as well. But it was a state-run thing. So we've got a sort of multinational thing going on here. And in fact, the designer Favier was actually French, and a Vichy French police officer, which is perhaps the first hint of some shenanigans going on here. And it gets kind of a bit crazier from there. So Thomas Nelson, noted firearms author, claimed that this design had been pilfered from the French by a female spy, which Ian Hogg turned into a glamorous female spy. I think a bit of imagination creeping in there. I can't find anything to really confirm that. I don't know where this rumour came from, but it was certainly floating around in the early 60s, which is only a decade into the history of this thing. So perhaps there's some truth to that. I mean, being set up as a Swiss design, coming from post-war France, I think it's perfectly possible that there's some confusion there, or some confabulation or something, and it's just a case of we need to move to Switzerland to set this thing up and then get it made in Spain. But there is this sort of spy story, and if anyone has picked up any more information on that and any way to verify it, please do let us know. But there's more than enough going on with the Rexim company, even without that extra rumour. Now, I mentioned that Favier was a Vichy French police officer, and as I guess was pretty standard at the end of the war, he was rounded up and arrested and charged with collaboration. He, post-war, then is accused of illicitly exporting arms to Nigeria. So he sets himself up as an arms dealer, having extracted himself from the legal system, and becomes what appears to be quite a dodgy arms dealer. But it doesn't stop there, because Rexim SA itself, so Favier is the French designer, but Rexim is the Swiss company that actually markets the design and sort of gets it finalised with Favier. So Roger Simonin is also rounded up by the authorities as a collaborator, but he's manages to get himself traded for his business partner Norbert. Seemingly the Swiss authorities are keener on getting their hands on Simonin for whatever reason. They trade poor Norbert back to France in exchange for Simonin, who sets up Rexim SA. Rexim then re-recruits Simonin. However, it turns out Simonin has been recruited by the French intelligence agency, and they want him to spy on his former and now again current business partner, and also to actively sabotage his activities, because Rexim are involved in supplying arms to the Algerian resistance, and the French government aren't very happy about that. So there's quite a lot going on with around the designer and the sort of design authority, the company that creates this design effectively, that's perhaps worth another historian diving further into if they haven't already. There is some interesting stuff online about them, but I'm sure there's more to discover. But we'll go back to the gun at this point. Just wanted to give you a bit of background. So they are both a sort of arguably shady, questionable operation, but they are definitely selling this legitimately, or trying to sell this legitimately to other countries. So, what is this? The Favor, it is marketed as the Favor as well as the FV Mark IV. There's not really a manual, but a promotional pamphlet for this thing over on the Forgotten Weapons website. So do check that out. We might be able to show you some bits of it while I'm talking. It's essentially a tube-based blowback-operated submachine gun, as you've seen on this channel many times and no doubt elsewhere. It's not unremarkable as far as that goes. It has a few unusual or even unique features. So the barrel is quick, well, easily detachable, but then I suppose so is the Sten gun barrel, so that's not massively innovative. That will factor into the popular culture side of the story, which we'll come to later. What it does for Rexim, and I guess potentially for the customer, but not really realised, it comes in 3 barrel lengths: 190mm, 340mm, and 460mm. Each of those configurations, and that's the only change really made to the gun, is marketed for a sort of different purpose. So the longer barrel is, well, in the English literature, it's referred to as a sniper weapon, but I think that's a mistranslation from haute précision, high precision. So in other words, more accurate than it would be with a short barrel, which is sort of broadly true in that you get higher pressure sustained over a longer barrel length means less bullet drop, so you can be more precise for sort of, I won't say police marksman role, but something a bit closer to that. Then there's the police version and the short version, the commando version. So they're thinking the short barrel version will be for military purposes, vehicle crews, perhaps commandos and paratroopers, that kind of thing, and a police variant, and then a sort of precision variant, relatively speaking, for whomever might wish to have it. It does have up front this very French, well, the MAS 36 famously has this design of bayonet with a sort of push button removal, spin it round, and you can clip it back into the same mount to use it as a bayonet. Copied famously by the FG42, or the designers of the FG42. Submachine guns with bayonets, not actually as uncommon as you would think. People who actually use them with bayonets, much more uncommon. So we do have that. We have a compensator at the front here with 4 slanted cuts to help keep the muzzle down. It's about 8 pounds-ish, some medium weight really for a, well, getting a little heavy, I would say, for a 1950 submachine gun. Weight's starting to come down by that point. It's not a Thompson, but it's hefty. Now that would help with recoil, of course, felt recoil, but nonetheless, I'd say it's a bit too heavy. We have a heat shield / barrel jacket around the barrel. The early model, as seen in the promotional pamphlet, has a finned barrel on all 3 barrel lengths. So that's done away with for cost, production, speed, that kind of thing, usual reasons. There's now this is a brief fun callback, I guess, to a recent video of ours with a weird experimental British submachine gun design that we featured. A contact figured out that this front sight block, quite distinctive, is from this gun. So that on that weapon, so that was Interarms UK that had been developed by. That was the only firearm component on that whole gun, apart from SLR rifle furniture. It's a commercial block, front sight / gas block, probably a front sight block for something, I think, because it's finished in a sort of phosphate. It has an offset dovetail for a front sight blade that isn't in there, and it has a slot for a cocking tube or a gas tube or something. Go back and check that out. Really interesting, sort of test bed level bit of work. Not a finished gun by any means, but interesting. Trying to come up with a new take on roller delay, or gas unlocked, roller locked, something or other. Check out the video. Meanwhile, back to this thing. So we have our barrel nut here, which you heard click just now. So you press this spring catch to undo that. I guess we can do that now, actually. So take the magazine off first. Magazine catch is a little bit awkward in that it's a lever that you have to tug down with your thumb and then rip the magazine out. Not impossible to operate, a little bit awkward depending what you're used to. And so we have a Madsen M50 magazine on this one, modified by machining a channel off the back of it for the magazine catch on this gun, operated by this lever up inside here. And they've machined away the feed lips at the front as well in order to accommodate it within this design. So that's a converted Madsen mag. You will read about this thing feeding MP40 magazines, and indeed there is a version of it that accepts modified in a parallel way MP40 magazines. And I think from the early depictions, that's the first one. They've gone to the M50 mag later on. But anyway, so commercially available magazines, but you are having to modify them and sell them yourself, and questionably you might be affecting function a little bit by cutting away those lips at the front, or the body of the mag at the front at least. So on safe, which we are at the moment, a word on markings in a bit, these have been machined off and replaced, but again, we'll come to that in just a bit later on, part to do with the later history of the thing. But on safe, which is at the rear here, so semi-auto, safe is at the back, that locks the bolt forward, so it can't come back and go forward and pick up a round and fire it by accident, by snagging the handle or maybe even banging it on the deck like an open bolt gun. This isn't an open bolt gun though. This is a closed bolt gun with a linear hammer. So if we put it to either semi or automatic, we can then cock it and we see that the linear hammer stays to the rear and the bolt goes forward, although it didn't go all the way forward into battery. This one isn't necessarily the most functional of the two. And in fact, without it in battery, it still flies forward. So we do have a safety notch there, like say a Sten gun, just to prevent, this can still, if you snag it or bang it on the ground or something, there's a point where the hammer won't catch the sear, but it still has enough oomph to fly forward as an assembly with the firing pin sticking forward and fire the gun. So you do potentially still need that safety notch. What you also have, if we lock it into the safety position, is this rotating breech cover. So covering the full length of the receiver, and this flange allows us, a bit like a grease, well, not really like a grease gun, but same principle. Covers the ejection port, and it also locks the bolt doubly in place, so you can carry this around safely. But to make it ready, you would have to rotate that out the way and take that out of its safety notch. So not exactly quick to get into action. And just before we take it apart, we have this very robust folding stock. Now, the early version of this has a space for a spare magazine in the butt. This does not. It has a sling swivel on the inside of the buttstock, in here, unusually. And then we have a lever back here. So it's not a hold it down affair, it's a up is locked, down is unlocked, and then the whole thing pivots to the side. It's actually sheet metal, but really quite robust. Reasonably compact when folded, but it's really quite hard to get hold of the pistol grip in a safe way with the stock folded, and you risk trapping your thumb in this buttstock. So maybe not the best design ever. And once you've unfolded it, you don't want to get into the fight, start fighting, because that's going to happen. And suddenly you're shooting around corners. You would have to remember to latch the stock shut, which is exactly why most firearms have a spring-loaded catch of some sort. So at that point, we can pull back these tabs, unscrew the receiver cap. There's that. And then remove the lower receiver. Come back to that in a moment. Then we can take the working parts out the rear, pull the cocking handle out, and then we get our firing assembly. And then by pressing the spring catch, we can undo this knurled barrel nut and pop off. It actually would have come off quicker than that, to be fair to the designers. I over-rotated that a bit there. And there off comes your barrel assembly. So quite quick, easy disassembly. Receiver is that simple steel tube that we're used to with a tack welded on magazine housing. The rear sights, which go ever optimistically up to, in this case, 300 meters. It's not that optimistic. You can certainly lob rounds in at that range and cause some sort of effect, but the lowest setting is 50, which is much more realistic. 100, 150, 200 is probably the upper limit of reasonable use of a submachine gun. And we have various cutouts on there for the working parts, of course, for the trigger mechanism and including the sear. And we have this now loose cover that comes off. That's that. So the working parts are quite interesting. We have a spring-loaded plunger MP40-esque sort of recoil system buffer here. We have the bolt itself, which is like almost like a miniature Sten bolt. It has a built-in sprung extractor. The ejector is inside the casing, which is pretty typical. Just a flange that sticks up inside. It's like a Sten gun, really. Nothing to write home about there. We've got a machined out central part to minimise friction, so this thing runs somewhat smoothly. We then have what's called the yoke. So this is what smacks into the back of the firing pin, which is sprung in here. I'm not going to take it out, but it's sprung, quite a strong spring actually. And if I can show this on camera, but yeah, that's what allows the firing pin to actually go forward and strike the primer, fire the cartridge. That's done via the yoke, but what's hitting the yoke? Well, that would be the linear hammer I mentioned. So this is what slides up and down on this rod here. And it's this outer surface here that contacts the yoke, which then hits the firing pin, which then hits the primer. Quite an interesting design for a submachine gun. A way to get closed bolt operation. Now, quite famously, the traditional open bolt setup with a big, fairly massive bolt slamming forward at the point of firing can disturb the point of aim a little bit. So if you do want to fire accurate single shots as a police officer, say, having a closed bolt system is desirable. It's perhaps less essential for period use by the military, but it's baked into the design, so you've got it anyway. It's not an MP5, let's put it that way, but it's closed bolt operation using this linear, as in back and forth, hammer instead of a pivoting hammer. Something that is worth mentioning on this actually is that if you haven't gathered from me fiddling with this, we have an outer spring, which is the hammer spring, and then we have internally a recoil spring in a telescoping plunger setup like the MP40. So we have a double nested spring setup here, but they're doing different jobs effectively. We then have the trigger mechanism, which confused me for quite some time. So we have on safe, that blocks the trigger from moving, blocks the sear actually. There, oh, by the way, there is the magazine catch exposed. So it's literally holding the magazine in from the rear, as you would have figured out by now, I'm sure, but sprung, of course. And so that's on safe, and then on semi-automatic, well, on automatic, it's straightforward. Squeezing the trigger all the way to the rear. So that, all the way to the rear, that's obviously going to fire automatic. It does that with a safety sear or auto sear, which is this at the front. When the bolt rides over it, that drops that last of the 3 little sears that are in this. That's what confused me at first, is it looks like one big sear split into 3. Auto sear is dropped by the bolt going forward, so it only fires when it's fully forward. Something you don't have to worry about with an open bolt gun, but you very much do with a closed bolt gun. So that's that one. We then have a slightly weird situation of, well, so it's a progressive trigger. So on auto, a bit like a Steyr AUG or a P90, you can squeeze the trigger part way and it will fire semi, and all the way and it will fire auto. And it's dropping them at different points in order to achieve that. Not quite sure why they built that in, because it does have a dedicated semi setting, which simply disconnects the trigger every single time. and allows this sear to stay popped up, holding the hammer to the rear. So on automatic, that is always down out the way, as long as you hold the trigger fully to the rear. It takes quite a bit of trigger pressure. So it's almost like they want to favour semi-auto operation, even when it's on auto. But that holds everything down except for the safety seal, which is then released. And then on semi, this still operates, of course, but that one is always left popped. It always disconnects, pops back up, and holds back the hammer. So that's the trigger mech. Not a great trigger. The trigger is with quite a strong spring, quite a narrow blade, a little bit hard on the finger if you're doing a lot of manipulation of the weapon. There's one other weird feature of this that I happened to notice, and I'm sort of wish I hadn't because it confused me for quite a while. It's this annular groove here on the hammer, which hangs up on the sear, which I can show you on this other example here, which we'll come back to. But I do want to point out that this does in fact take the modified MP40 magazine that I mentioned earlier. So this is slightly earlier than the other one. Neither of them has a serial number, so we can't in theory say that, but based on the pamphlet with the early finned barrel variant, and then it appears to then be this version that takes an MP40 mag, or maybe there were options, unclear. And then we get the perhaps later gun that is Madsen. But anyway, main reason for grabbing this at the moment is to just show you that if you partially cock this design, there was a click there, the bolt will then go forward, but the hammer is not fully cocked. It will be released if you press the trigger, but that appears to be another measure against accidental sort of slam firing. So if you do snag the handle or bang the thing on the deck, this will get caught, and you probably won't have enough inertia to fully cock the thing. The bolt will go forward, but the hammer will be retained. So it's like an intermediate position. I guess it's a little bit like the ratcheting cocking handle on an Uzi, but from a different perspective. So I think the idea is that that wouldn't be enough to fire that very strong, to depress that very strong sprung firing pin. And the idea is that if you happen to bang it on the deck, it's going to get caught there and not come all the way back to there as a combined mass and then fly forward and maybe have enough energy to fire the cartridge. Seems to be what that is about. It's not documented anywhere. That's just me sort of surmising. But I wondered why this one, which I'll come back to, malfunctions in that there's a delay. So it will on auto, bolt goes forward and then the hammer goes after it with a delay, and that's what made me notice this groove. Oh, by the way, before I put this back together, one of the early options was a replaceable barrel that had a grenade launcher spigot on it. So launching rifle grenades from your submachine gun, which might explain why this stock is, although sheet metal and folding, really designed to be quite robust and attached by two bolts. Because launching a very heavy object off the end of a submachine gun seems like a bad idea, and it looks like they deleted that option later on. And I can't think of another submachine gun that launches rifle grenades. The American M1 carbine series was adapted for grenade launching, and that's even lighter than a submachine gun. So maybe I'm being unfair, but suffice to say, most people, most designers, most companies have never tried to launch rifle grenades off them submachine guns. Right, here we are, as if by magic, back together, magazine off. I just wanted to show you, in the process of reassembling this is ever so slightly out of battery there, and the system does allow for that, or compensates for that. The trigger is disconnected, whether or not we're on semi or automatic, trigger's not doing anything. So if you do kind of limp wrist the cocking of this thing, you would have to forward assist it to then drop the hammer. So it's a sound design as far as it goes, a little bit heavy, and probably a little bit expensive. And I suppose the other thing is the market is pretty much saturated. It's just after the Second World War, there are absolutely tons of surplus Stens, grease guns, MP40s, you name it, floating around. What does this thing offer over those very cheap weapons? a little bit more precision. That's about it. At significant cost, relatively speaking, because there's a bit more going on here than some of those. Yes, it doesn't take too long for things like the Beretta M12 to come along, but that's significantly lighter and, dare I say, better designed than this thing. This doesn't really attract much attention at all. Only 5,000 are made in 1954, and in 1957, Rexim SA goes bankrupt and sort of disappears for the moment. The La Coruña factory / arsenal carries on selling them, and I believe that's what we have here. So let's compare them side by side. So no doubt made in the same year, albeit one is MP40 mag, one is M50 mag. So the original markings, we have the Rexim logo, which you'll see a version of in that promotional pamphlet as well. Like a sort of star X situation there. And selector markings are S for safe, obviously, SA, semi-auto, and FA for full auto. So in English. So they're internationally understood as far as English is understood, of course. Good bet if you're going to not use pictograms, which weren't really a thing at this point, is to use English, because people are generally going to be able to figure that out. Even if they don't know the language, they'll know the convention. It's not the automatic repetition safe convention that the Israelis used, but nonetheless, it's there in English. And some languages have enough of a parallel there in the terms used that you can sort of fudge it for them as well. So what I think has happened here is La Coruña, in order to sell these elsewhere, well, first of all, they've obliterated, milled off the Rexim marking, so they've erased Rexim from existence. I don't know if that's just out of sort of an attempt to market it as their own product, or because Rexim's name was a bit tainted by then, or what, maybe both, but that's gone. They've milled out those three markings, and they have instead put in S, C, and R in the spaces left by milling out the original markings. Now, I am not by any means sure what these stand for. Logically, it's a Spanish factory, so we might have Seguro and Rafaga for the S and the R, but I have no idea what the C would stand for, or if I've even chosen the right language there. Maybe these were for a specific contract to some country that I haven't come across. If anyone knows what the S, C, and R, especially the C, if I am right about the Spanish, stand for, please let us know in the comments, or drop us a line through the inquiries form on the website. That is a little bit of a mystery on this one. So this does show up in fighting in the Congo and in Nigeria, both in the 60s, and Nigeria is in 1969. Now, Favier is there as an arms dealer, and there's evidence of him from the CIA, of him importing arms or exporting arms to Nigeria. There's no mention of these being part of that order, but I guess there wouldn't have been that many, so they could have gone in there. Who knows? I mean, it could have been 2 chapters of his life. He's moved on from the gun design and he's just an arms dealer, and that's complete coincidence, but it's a bit interesting that they show up in Nigeria when Favier is also there dealing arms to Nigeria at the same time. I think that's a bit too much of a coincidence for me, but I can't say categorically that he was supplying these to Nigeria. This also inspires a near copy by the Turkish, the M68, with a solid buttstock. Well, a solid fixed wooden buttstock and grip, and it does look quite, it's substantially derived, but it isn't recognisably a Rexim, a Favor pattern submachine gun. So it does have a bit of an afterlife there in Turkish service, and with Turkish markings. So that's probably the pinnacle of its actual service use. And don't forget, only 5,000 of the original made. I'm not sure how many were made in Turkey of the M68 derivative. Now, this is where Rexim comes back into the story, because the company name is resurrected by a chap called Ottokar Hermann in 1969, who was also up to shady goings-on. The company was used to launder money for the East German Stasi. They don't bring the gun back. In fact, I don't think they're doing anything to do with small arms, really. But the company does come back with someone else, unrelated, who is also up to some shenanigans. So it's a really fascinating history to have dived into. But the thing that kicked me off down this rabbit hole is the movies. So this thing first shows up, and some of you have probably been screaming at the screen about this, in Star Wars A New Hope in 1977, carried by Dr. Evazan. That's retrospectively, as I think all of the guns in Star Wars were retrospectively named as the SE-14. That then crops up in Battlefront 2 as a droid blaster, and then it's a Death Trooper sidearm in Rogue One as well. Different suffix letters for different variants. They all go back to that original 1977 appearance in not a background character, quite an important sort of minor character. In that it's the scene where this guy gets slashed across the torso, and his mate gets his arm cut off, and it lands on the floor. So sort of blink and you'll miss it, really, but it is in there. Now, in that configuration, they took advantage of saved a little bit of time, in that the barrel just comes straight off, giving you a sort of shorter overall length, obviously, and they've unscrewed. I can't do this without a specialist tool, so I'm not going to attempt it. Otherwise, I would have chopped this down for you, or made this shorter for you on camera. But so remove the stock, remove the barrel assembly, and then they put a cut-down magazine on the bottom of the gun with a single-point sight on it, and then a telescopic sight on top of it. I'm not sure of the model of that, but it was a 4x20 scope, and that gave you that classic Star Wars look of something that looks like a real gun, but not anything recognizable, aided, of course, by the Favor being not that well known either. And the sort of changes the silhouette, makes it look like a ray gun. Now, for me, what's even more fun is that same prop setup, this is Batu, by the way, so they actually donate one of these to the pattern room in 1969, same year that Rexim comes back from the dead. I think that's probably coincidence, unless there was some liquidation thing going on that I don't understand or know about. Probably coincidence. They kept some for the movies, and they're in a handful of movies as themselves, supplied by Bapti. Then they're in A New Hope, and then 2 years later in 1979, the same setup ends up as the laser pistol in Alien. And in the final cut, it's kind of minimized. You see them on their hips briefly, and you also see a little baby version in the holsters of the children who were used as stunt people, essentially, for the scaled down shot in the Alien Derelict. So when they're all suited up in spacesuits, initially you see them full size, and then the long shot is children in child-sized everything. And they had to make a child-sized version of the prop, so they used what a lot of you will recognise from childhood, the Webley Junior air pistol. We have one here in its nice original box. And you can sort of see how that would work. It's roughly, if you take off the stock and the barrel of this, as they did, and you attach a fake magazine housing and two small scopes to it, you can see how this, from a distance, and it is from a distance, would look enough like a laser pistol based on the Rexim to pass muster. So if you have a look at the IMFDB, you'll see these tricked out with their greeblies, as they call them, to make them both look like this fictional laser pistol. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, for how things go later in the series, but they're sort of, again, blink and you'll miss it, because they're only carried on their person, and for all we know, they're some sort of tool or a laser cutter or something like that, and not a weapon. Well, we do see in the director's cut, which is, has other scenes added back in that don't necessarily jibe with later films, like the Dallas cocooning scene, which is completely obliterated by the Alien Queen life cycle thing. So is the director's cut canon? Does anyone care about canon? Regardless, there's one scene where Kane, John Hurt's character, like people give characters in Alien films abuse for being dumb and sticking their heads over alien eggs. Well, the very first guy to ever do that, at least on you know, as far as we see, is armed with his laser pistol, ready to shoot something if he has to, and it's just that it surprises him and he drops the pistol. That scene is cut from the theatrical release, so these things never really got their big time as a weapon, and they didn't establish that weapons in the future of Ridley Scott's Alien universe, Dan O'Bannon and everyone else, they're supposed to be using laser weapons. James Cameron sort of takes advantage of the removal of these scenes, comes up with the Alien Queen instead of the egg morphing scene, and comes up with the pulse rifles firing bullets, more believable, more grounded, instead of these laser weapons. So these are sort of a dead end, but they are still in Alien if you really look closely, or if you watch the director's cut, you will see one stand out fairly prominently. Thanks for watching, as ever. And as ever, we do have our 3 museum buildings that you can come and visit if you're in the UK or able to visit those. All of them are worth a look. Speaking of which, this little guy is our new lapel pin or brooch, for however you care to wear it, which is our Sexton self-propelled gun, which you can see in person in the metal down at Fort Nelson, which is our artillery museum. Or buy yourself one of these from the shop. So you'll be able to find the shop on the website, or link will be in the description to that. Otherwise, do the YouTube things, like, subscribe, the bell thing if you want to. We do still have our Gladiators exhibition on as well. So again, if you're able to visit us, check that out. But otherwise, we'll see you here again on What Is This Weapon next week.